Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of John Tyler, and the focus is accidental president. The year is 1841. In fact, it's April 5th, just after sunrise, and Fletcher Webster, who is the chief clerk in the State Department, working for his father, Secretary of State Daniel Webster, Fletcher Webster is arriving at John Tyler's Williamsburg home with a telegram from the cabinet. That telegram read in part, "Sir, it has become our most painful duty to inform you that William Henry Harrison, late President of the United States, has departed this life." Harrison had died about 24 hours before. John Tyler got in transportation with Webster, headed back to the capital of Washington, D.C. to take on his new responsibilities per the Constitution. But the question is, what were those duties? And there was confusion a little bit based on the language in the Constitution itself. What happens when a president dies in terms of the role of the vice president going forward? They looked at those terms. Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, which said, in case of the removal of the president from office, or of his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of the said office, the same shall devolve on the vice president. The same, but the same what? This was the question. Was it the office that befell on the vice president? In other words, he would be the president of the United States, or was it just the powers and duties of that office, in which case many would believe he would still the vice president in an acting capacity as the acting president. And this had a lot of meaning to folks in the political circles, certainly in terms of the power and authority of the person in office. Some were very much of the opinion that Tyler was only an acting president, including the likes of John Quincy Adams, a former president himself, who's currently serving in the U.S. House of Representatives. Adams said, "I paid a visit this morning to Mr. Tyler, who styles himself president, and not vice president, acting as president," which would be the correct style. But it is a construction in direct violation of both the grammar and context of the Constitution to consider himself president. But that's exactly what John Tyler had in mind. He wasn't having any of this nonsense. The president was no more. He was the vice president. He was now taking over as president of the United States with everything that associated with it. There was no acting associated with that title. And he went about putting this into motion. He got the chief judge of the Circuit Court of District of Columbia, William Cranch, to join him at the Indian Queen Hotel and give him the presidential oath of office. This, by the way, ended the longest period in American history without a president, about 53 hours from the time that Harrison died until Tyler took the oath of office. Tyler, at 51 years of age, at this point, becoming the youngest person to hold that title as President of the United States. Tyler continued, immediately called a cabinet meeting together, and he made it very clear who was going to be the boss of this group. William Henry Harrison had picked these Whigs to be his cabinet advisors, and he had a new style for the cabinet where he was just one among equals. His intent was to get his cabinet together on all major topics. They would all vote. He would have one vote. The secretaries would all have one vote. The majority would hold. Well, this was explained to Tyler, who was, again, going to have none of this. This was not the way he was going to run his presidency. He informed the cabinet that I can never consent to being dictated to as to what I shall or shall not do. I, as president, shall be responsible for my administration. I hope to have your hearty cooperation in carrying out its measures. So long as you see fit to do this, I shall be glad to have you with me. When you think otherwise, your resignations will be accepted. Pretty clear. Well, none resigned at that moment, but give it a few months and all but one would hand in their pink slips for a variety of reasons, mainly political and ideological dissension in the ranks between the cabinet and their new president. We'll talk about more about that in our next episode. Well, Tyler even gave an inaugural address in which he said, in deciding upon the adaptation of any such measures to the end proposed, as well as its conformity to the Constitution, I shall resort to the fathers of the great Republican school for advice and instruction. The great Republican school. This was the ideology of John Tyler. It goes back to Thomas Jefferson. It goes back to his father, Judge John Tyler. The Republican ideals of individual liberty and state sovereignty. This was what was going to dictate the presidency of John Tyler. The Whigs, if they were listening, this should be a cause for concern. Again, more about that in our next episode. Some of the family members of John Tyler joined him in Washington, D.C. This was a very difficult period for his wife, Letitia. She had recently suffered a paralytic stroke. The time she would spend in the White House, she would spend almost exclusively upstairs in her bedroom. She was the First Lady of the United States, but she performed almost none of those duties because she was incapacitated. Their son, John, became his father's official secretary, so brought him into the fold along with his other son, Robert, who took a position in the land office. Robert's wife, Priscilla, actually fulfilled most of the duties associated with the First Lady as the official White House hostess, again, because Letitia Tyler was unable to do that. There were some early acts of comedy with the Whig-controlled legislature. First of all, that legislature formally recognized Tyler as the President of the United States. This was in a special session of Congress shortly after Tyler took over. Harrison had called this special session to focus on challenges in the economy. One of the first things they did when they came together, the House and the Senate separately voted to formally recognize Tyler as President of the United States. So good start there. In terms of Tyler, he mentioned to the Senate, for example, that he was going to be happy to receive the advice and consent from the Senate on his political appointees. If they wanted to reject, he seemed to think that would be okay at the time. He also pledged no wholesale changes, removals of political appointees in trying to strike a good balance with the Congress. And he agreed with the first piece of legislation they sent him, which was to repeal the Sub-Treasury law. This was an economic construct that had gone through in the Martin Van Buren administration just before he left his administration. In fact, it was about Van Buren's only legislative accomplishment to establish the Sub-Treasury. The Whigs quickly wanted to get rid of it, and Tyler signed the repeal into law. So this was all seemingly off to a good start between the Whig-controlled Congress and the Whig vice president, now President of the United States. But just starting in this very same session of Congress, the conflicts were about to grow. They were going to grow fast. They were going to grow big, but those are stories for another day. That is John Tyler, an accidental president, from the life of John Tyler. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.